Dr. Duke Pesta received his Master of Arts in Renaissance Literature from John Carroll University and his PhD in Shakespeare and Renaissance Literature from Purdue University. He has taught at major research institutions and small liberal arts colleges on a wide variety of subjects at the graduate and undergraduate level, including courses on Shakespeare, Renaissance literature, the Bible, Russian literature, Christian apologetics, and C.S. Lewis. He has been active in educational reform and was instrumental in developing and implementing an elective Bible course that is currently available for public high schools in Texas. Dr. Pesta is the Academic Director of Freedom Project Academy, the American Opinion Foundation's online classical school. He is also a nationally recognized critic of Common Core, which are the federal standards for K through 12th grade, and having delivered over 400 talks in 40 states and has done more than 2,500 radio and television interviews on the subject. He speaks at homeschool conventions and educational conferences across the nation on topics including the necessity of homeschooling, the decline of morality and critical thinking in the public schools, and various ways that colleges and universities indoctrinate the students. Please welcome Dr. Duke Pesta.
Thank y'all for being here tonight. I appreciate that very much. And I see a lot of faces that were here at lunch. We had a good talk about Common Core. We talked a little bit about what's going on in the K through 12 government school systems and all that scary stuff that we went into. If you missed that talk, don't worry. I'm going to talk about the people who put that stuff in place. So if you can imagine what happens at universities, eventually what happens at universities bleeds down into the high school, middle school, and elementary school. So if you weren't able to be there for the Common Core talk, I think you're going to get a lot out of this talk, and you'll see many similarities. As Barbara pointed out, my primary job, I've got a lot of hats that I wear. My primary job is I'm a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin. The University of Wisconsin system is very highly regarded as as a university system. It's also noted for its radical politics. Madison, Wisconsin gives, think of UT Austin without the half-dressed people. It's too cold. And you've pretty much got Madison. They call it the Berkeley of the Midwest at Madison. So the University of Wisconsin system is a well-regarded university system and a very, very radical one. Pretty much all the major state university systems are, though. You can't pick a single state in this union. That includes Oklahoma. I taught for 8 years in Oklahoma, and I didn't teach at Norman, OU. I taught at Oklahoma State University, which is the sort of Bible Belt area. It's the tech college, right? And that was, you would have thought you were on the campus of Norman in terms of how radical the politics were. People have to remember something about universities. All university professors are trained the same way. So it doesn't matter if you send your kids to a Christian college. 90% of the professors that those Christian colleges hire are professors that were trained in big schools like Austin or Madison, just the way it is. There are way more professors than there are jobs. So for every one professorial position in the humanities or the arts or the sciences, there are potentially hundreds and hundreds of applicants. So it's a very cutthroat thing. It also, one of the negative consequences of this, far too many people getting educated, I like to call it getting educated beyond their intelligence. I think that's a good way to phrase it. I have, I know this for a fact because I would include myself in this. You go to college long enough and pay them enough money, they're going to hand you a degree. That's pretty much how it goes, right? And a lot of people end up in graduate programs, particularly in the humanities, but across the board, because they just don't want to leave school. And it's a big crisis that we have. Many of my professor colleagues, I wasn't this way. I came from a bit of a broken family. I paid for my own schooling in high school, actually. I went to a Catholic school. And then paid for, I didn't get any debt for my diplomas. But that was a different kind of a pathway I took. But most college professors, stop and think about it. Why are they so radical? Why are they so out of touch with the values of the kids you send to college? It's because most of them have never really had a serious job off campus. When you think about it, most college professors start going to school when they're 4 or 5. They get their high school diploma, they go right into a 4-year undergraduate program, they graduate. 2-3 years later, they get a master's degree. At that point, they're kind of hooked on it, and then 5-6 years later, they get a PhD. They're 30 years old, and that's how I was when I got my PhD. I was 30 years old when I got my PhD at Purdue University, and within a few months, I was hired by a university. That's it for so many university professors. And this is the important point to begin the talk. Why is socialism? So we understand the insulated nature of university professors. Most of us have never had to make a payroll. Most of us have never had employees depend upon us. Most of us have never had to produce something and sell it to make a living. Most of us have not had to deal with regulation from government, the burdens of tax policies with government. We just don't have those problems. So it makes sense, doesn't it, why socialism would be the perfect thing for us. I tell my university kids every semester, because and make no bones about it, as you're going to see here today, it is not oversimplification to point out, by any means necessary. Socialism was defeated politically everywhere around the world, even in China, right, where the Chinese had to eat, they stopped being a third world country when they finally jettisoned socialist economics, right? Every other aspect of China remains very tightly controlled and socialistic, but they knew they were a third world country for the duration of socialism. When they jettisoned socialism economically, they became the richest country in the world, right? So it's ironic, isn't it, that even an experiment like China with all of its wealth now is trying to balance that with the repressive policies that keep everybody else in line. So it shouldn't surprise us that university professors, being as insulated as we are, being as lacking responsibility when it comes to how most of us have to feed ourselves and our families. They also, and I point this out to my students every semester, you know, socialism makes sense on a college campus because, in a way, college campuses are the perfect socialist utopia. We professors, we get up there and lecture 3 or 4 times a week, right? That's our job. 3, 4, 5 times a week we get up there. And at a place like UT Austin, right, with a big name research institute, professors are teaching maybe 1 course a year or 1 a semester. That's it. Most of your kids, when you send them to UT Austin, will never have an actual professor until they're juniors or seniors. Almost all of the base teaching is done by graduate students. Now, let that sink in for a moment, too. You're paying all that money for a UT Austin degree, and probably 60% of the courses or 70% of the courses your kids take are never taught by professors. They're taught by kids 5 or 6 years older than them getting a graduate degree. And let us think about this whole process. But as far as the university goes, I tell my students, think about what we have here. 4 or 5 times a week we get up and we talk to you for an hour at a time, hour and a half at a time. Somebody else erases the blackboard, somebody else vacuums the carpets, somebody else brings the food into the cafeteria, somebody else cuts the hedges and mows the lawn, somebody else makes sure the pipes and the plumbing are working. In fact, we do nothing. We get up and talk to your kids 4 or 5 times a week. The whole system is run by somebody else who makes a lot less money than us, and then they're not tenured. The only people who get tenured is us. And what other profession? This is a socialist dream, right? What other profession can you work 6 years and then be tenured and guaranteed a job that they can never fire you for unless you shoot somebody? How does that work, right? And inevitably what happens, what always happens, is when a professor gets tenured, then whatever scruples they had about politics or keeping them out of the classroom, whatever fear they had that their students might revolt, or that the moms and dads who pay our salaries, right, might someday start pulling kids away, tenure is a guarantee that allows them to become as protected. The argument for tenure was that professors need to be free to express different opinions. And I'll never forget, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, I remember the 70s and the 80s, broad-minded conservative faculty members, I was just talking to a person before the talk here today, and was telling me about their experiences at UT Austin back in the 60s, when it was basically a business school. It was very conservative. And within a couple generations, that was completely transformed. Because what happened is that conservative-minded professors recognized the need for discourse, recognized the need for multiple perspectives. That's what you can't have education in a monolith. And so they brought in liberal professors. They hired professors from all over the country, right, to give UT Austin a taste of something bigger than Texas, right? We brought professors in from New York and California. And those professors and their agenda, once they had power, they didn't welcome conservative voices. They froze them out. And so you have this terrible, terrible, terrible monolith now. And I say this as somebody who would say to you, I would be upset if the universities were as right-wing as they are now left-wing. Because it makes for weak arguments on the right. If we dominated the universities, the conservatives, well then we would do what the liberals do. We'd stop having to make arguments. We would just assume we were right, because we only were, you remember the famous story of Pauline Kael, the liberal New York Times movie reviewer, book reviewer in the 70s? When Richard Nixon won his second term in office in 1972, Pauline Kael was at a liberal cocktail party in New York. And she said to her friends, "I cannot believe Richard Nixon won. Everybody I know voted against him." right? That's the college, right? When you surround yourself with only people who think like you, education is doomed. You need that. And if the universities were as right-wing as they were left-wing, it would be a disservice to our conservative kids, because our Christian kids, because the impetus to argue, the impetus to be able to prove a point, the impetus to lay your worldview alongside somebody else's and have the confidence to believe that yours is better or alter yours if you're convinced it's not, that's gone now. And that's what's happened at universities. They have become absolutely monolithic. And not surprising. Here we are, remember the 1960s where hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture's gotta go. Welcome to the world where it's happening now, right? We're tearing down historical statues and monuments. And it's utterly ironic, right? If we're going to take down Robert E. Lee's statue. Now, Robert E. Lee was a very complex man. There were so many aspects and facets to his character. A remarkable study, a very necessary historical figure, whatever you think of him in the end. But if we're going to pull his statues down because he fought for the Confederacy, that's fine. Then why don't we also pull down Margaret Sanger's statues? Founder of Planned Parenthood, right? I'll tell you one thing Robert E. Lee never was. Robert E. Lee never was a eugenicist. Robert E. Lee never argued that we need legalized abortion to get rid of black and brown skinned babies. Margaret Sanger did that, right? And today, at this day, at the University of Wisconsin, they have an endowed chair in her honor. Let's think in for a second. Right? There's an endowed chair to honor Margaret Sanger, who was a racist and a eugenicist, but because she was a progressive, right? And gave rise to a progressive organization. And there is no cause, absolute silence. She's a hero. This is the danger of this uniformity, this monolithic ideology we've allowed to thrive on college campuses. The only people who can stop this is the legislature, and they won't do it. Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we have arguably one of the most conservative governors in the country in Scott Walker. We have a Republican Senate by a large margin, a Republican Assembly by a large margin, and we have moved the needle not at all. In fact, when you look at these websites that report on abuses on college campuses, Wisconsin is always, always, always heavily represented there. And yet the legislature just gives them more money. Every time they kick a Christian group off campus for no reason, every time they try to silence a conservative professor, I think I'm the only one, every time they do stuff like that, we give more money. We just give them more money. And so as long as we're, and the parents too, I mean, moms and dads will grumble about these lefty lunatics in college campuses and then happily pack Junior off to UT Austin, right? Have him live in the dorms. It's one of those things, right? If our response to this kind of mistreatment of our kids is to keep sending, and I made this point with the public schools, if our response to this kind of mistreatment is to keep sending them, well, that's on us, isn't it? Give me an example. Parkland, right? The Parkland shooting in Florida. And how all those kids now are being used as, weaponized and used as props and pawns, right? And the gun war. Well, think about this. Guns are not inside your kids' schools. Guns have to be brought in from the outside. Guns are not something your kids encounter routinely in a school day, and when they're there, they're alien to the campus. And yet, we have this huge progressive movement that's convincing many people who don't think very much that these kids at 16 have absolute moral authority. That's why the left is using them, by the way. The adult lefties could not argue us away from our guns, right? And not because we're mercenaries and murderers, but because we respect the purpose of the Second Amendment. The purpose of gun ownership is to protect us from them, from government, right? We knew that. So we give these kids absolute moral authority, and to criticize them, you see what happens to Laura Ingraham. You challenge their premise, you challenge their flawed logic, you get your sponsors pulled from you. Meanwhile, we've got April 23rd, a group of conservatives, and God bless them, are planning a walk out of public school to protest the sexualization of our kids. It's a great idea, it's a noble endeavor, right? But the argument is that on April 23rd, moms and dads are going to have their kids march out of school to protest the fact that 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds in our government schools are being exposed to transgenderism, are being told that gender is a construct, are being asked, as they are in California, a little 5-year-old in California kindergarten decided that he was a she, and the teacher stopped class and had a party for the kid so he could stand up in front of his peers and change into girls' clothing, right, at 5 years old in California. So they're going to walk out, that's great, but here's my thing. Guns aren't in your kids' schools. When guns enter there, it's very seldom, and the violence is unforgivable, I'm not saying that, but guns, most of your kids will never, ever, ever be shot at in a public school. But every single day of the year, your kid's going to get sexualized. Every single day of the year, your kid's going to be exposed to this stuff. So you're going to march out for a day, and then send your kids right back the next day. It doesn't make any sense to me. Right? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And with the universities, the only ones who can really help you are the legislators. At the end of the talk today, I will, one of the things I can be most useful to you, perhaps, is if you've got kids and grandkids going to college, I can tell you what they're facing. And I also tell you, I can give you tips on how to survive it. I'm actually writing a book now. It's titled How to Survive College with Faith in God, Country, and Self Intact. Those three things are what are going to be taken from your kids. Faith in God, faith in their country, and faith in themselves, the big collective that we're supposed to become. These are the three things that are most under attack in your kindergartens now and in your graduate programs and colleges too. So at the end of that, we'll come back to it. In a word, and I think this is self-evident by watching the news and paying attention, what's happened to American education at every level is that it has been hijacked by ideology. Right? We are no longer terribly concerned about educating kids so that they can provide for themselves, so that they can have a family, so that they can be entrepreneurs. You have no idea how snarked at, how frowned upon the word entrepreneur is on a college campus. The idea that you think you can earn your own money that doesn't belong to the rest of us, they do not like that. In a recent, about a year and a half ago, I was teaching a writing course for business majors. Teaching business majors how to write in a business way, right, to be able to communicate amongst themselves. And I was getting so annoyed with them because one of the assignments was write about a business person that you admire greatly and tell us why. Every one of them, this is a class of 30 juniors, every one of them picked either Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. And the only thing they talked about was how much money they gave to progressive causes. That was the only thing they admired for. This was in February, I'll never forget, it was Valentine's Day in Wisconsin. It was 15 degrees below zero. Right? I made them put their pens down. I made them put their coats on. I walked this entire class of 30 business students around the campus in the freezing cold. And I pointed to every building on that campus. I said, can you point to one building here? There's your football stadium. There's your business, there's your law school. There is your medical center. Can you point to one building on this campus that was named for a professor or a teacher? Nope. They're all named after people who worked hard, graduated from the university, made a lot of money, and gave it right back to the university. Right? And that I, a hippie professor of Shakespeare, you would think me, an English professor, right? Gotta be a hippie, right? If you're teaching Shakespeare on a college campus, odds are you're a hippie, right? I don't know or you're me, you're a dinosaur, one or the other. There's no in between. But the fact that I was teaching business students what the purpose of business was should tell you how bad it's gotten on college campuses. In fact, there are only two areas where there's anything even like balance between conservative and liberal positions on college campuses. Agriculture. Agriculture is one of the few things that tends to be dominated by conservatives or Republicans. But when I say dominated, it's 60-40. That's huge for conservatives. The other one is business, and it's 50-50. Literally business programs, huge surveys have been done. Business programs are about 50-50. So you send your kid to the business school at UT Austin, he's got a 1 in 2 chance of having a conservative. By conservative, I mean a professor that actually cares first about business, right? Not politics. 1 out of 2. And so these are the numbers that we face. Everything else is overweight. In English, which I teach, last one I saw was 39-1. 39. Now, I've been on 7 different university campuses. I've never met anybody else. So I don't know how that, I'm not sure if that's true. The closest I ever came, this is a true story, another cold March day, and they're all cold. We got snow on the ground now. Cold March day in Wisconsin, and I was walking across campus, and I keep my head down on campus. I'm a known character on campus, so I keep my head down, and I hear this psst, psst. I stop, and, right? So peering around the corner of a brick building was a guy, a distinguished older man with a white beard, psst, psst. And he had a trench coat on. I'm thinking, I'm getting flashed here. But it was Wisconsin in the winter, so maybe not. So I walked over there, and he says, he kind of pulled me behind the building, he says, are you Pesta? I said, yes. He goes, I'm the chair of the chemistry department. My students tell me you're a conservative and a Christian. I said, yes. He goes, you keep doing what you're doing. Right? And I was about to say something. It's almost like he vanished into the mist. Right? And he just had to tell me who he was, and he walked. But this is a guy who had been tenured for 40 years. I mean, he was a full professor. They couldn't touch him, and he had to hide around corners to be able to talk to me. Pretty staggering when you think about it. So what's going on? What's going on is that we have decided, the progressive left has decided, that the purpose of your kids' education is first and foremost what they call social justice. I call social justice both social. Famous historian once observed that the Holy Roman Empire was not Holy Roman nor an empire, right? All three of those things are true, it was none of those things. In the same way that social justice, as practiced on college campuses, is antisocial and it is unjust. It is warmed over Marxist theory. That's all it is. You may remember that before they called it social justice theory, they called it liberation theology, remember? Think about it. The generation of Catholic priests that molested all those boys was the generation that grew up in the liberation theology period, right? In the 60s, and late 50s and 60s, Latin American social justice Marxist theory infiltrated the Roman Catholic seminaries. Those were the generations of priests that had, and Pope Francis is one of them. I suppose I can say this, I'm Catholic, right? I was born Catholic, right? Pope Francis is exactly this kind of a preacher, right? A social justice warrior. So he came out the other day and said, remember, intimated that there's no such thing as hell. Well, if there's no such thing as hell, the Pope said this. If there's no such thing as hell, well then I guess as a Catholic I'd have to point out a couple of things. Then why do we need to be baptized? What's the purpose of confession or communion? All right? If that's true, right, then there's nothing. There's either nothing or there's just heaven. But this is the kind of situation you find yourself in. This is the same Pope, by the way, who 4 or 5 years ago flew to Cuba, you may remember, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Raul and Fidel and lectured America about the evils of capitalism. Nobody in the last 50 years, nobody in the world has killed more Roman Catholics than the Castro brothers. Not a word to them about the murdering of his flock, but a photo, and they were standing right behind the mural of Che Guevara in Revolutionary Square.
Oh, yes.
Che Guevara, something very fitting about that, Che Guevara looking down on the Pope with a big beaming smile, the Pope standing between two of the 20th century's greatest killers, lecturing America about the evils of free markets. That kind of ideology has gone through a number of revolutions. It infiltrated the seminaries as liberation theology in the 60s, right? It was behind the hey, hey, ho, ho marches, the jettisoning of Western culture. And now it's just morphed into something else. It's just called social justice. But it's antisocial in the sense that all the things that classical liberals used to stand for no longer stands for, right? Classical liberals of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, they were all about borders. Protect our borders. They were all about protecting our citizens. They were very pro-Second Amendment. The classical liberal insisted, people like Martin Luther King, insisted on seeing people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their characters. Do you understand that under the social justice pedagogy your kids are learning from kindergarten through college now, they're being told that we can only see people as race. That to pretend to not see race makes you a racist. Right? And we're teaching things like white privilege, right? And what is the purpose of white privilege? It's the premise that if you're white, you participate in racism. And you whether you know it or not. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how you talk to people. It doesn't matter how you treat people. Because of the color of your skin, we brand you something. I thought that was what the civil rights movement tried to fight. And so you can see how, as progressives, as liberals became pushed out of public spaces by progressives, you see what happens. And here's another point. There's very few people like me on a college campus, almost none. The reason I've been at 7 different universities, because once they find out who I am, I don't get to stay, right? So somehow, every time I've been fired or let go by a university for no reason, I keep asking the Lord, I said, are you done now? Can I go do something productive with my life? And he finds me. It's really remarkable to get not tenured at 7 different universities and continue to find jobs. So he found me a job in Wisconsin. Talk about the belly of the parasite inside the belly of the beast. Found me a job in Wisconsin. And I got to tell you that, right? I had 4 of my colleagues come up to me afterwards and say, you know, we really wish we could have not given you tenure. They asked me to do, they gave me a list of 5 things to do for tenure. I figured it out. I did 15 of them. And legally they couldn't get rid of me. And the reward for that is now I'm completely isolated on campus because they will have nothing to do with me, which is good. I don't have anything to do with them either. But the answer to this is it's a difficult problem. Now, with regards to the socialist mindset, because that's what this is. All of this goes back to Karl Marx. All of this is the same collectivism, the same globalism, the same anti-monetary policy, the same anti-Western culture, the same anti-religion, and in particular, anti-Christian bias. All these things go back. Stalin, the same things that we're doing in the schools now, Vladimir Lenin boasted about in 1917, right, that we were going to do. I started by pointing out that political socialism, governmental socialism, was defeated on almost every single front across the globe. But educational socialism won, and it's much more dangerous. People will only stand socialism for so long, and if they stand it too long, they won't be able to fight it anyway, right? That's really the difference between free and controlled countries, right? In a country like ours, we can still fight it, although the mechanisms for fighting it are getting awfully thin. They own the schools, they own the media, they own Hollywood. That's enough, isn't it? To take your kids from you, to take their worldviews and corrupt them. I mean, your kids spend, and this is why I go back to that point, why do you have them in those schools? You know what's going to happen to them. But you're giving them 10 hours a day to a public school system that does not like their religion, does not like you having final say over them as parents. Are you surprised now that the schools have become in loco parentis? They are providing birth control to your little girls without asking you? Your 12-year-old daughter shows up on a middle school campus with a couple of Motrin once a month, and she can be thrown off for possessing drugs. But under the new Obama health care law, somebody at your school can give your daughter birth control, including the morning after abortion pill, without ever having to consult you anymore. You don't have to know about it. If your children decide that they are transgender, they can tell a teacher and get whatever they need. If they want to, at age 9 or 10, take medicine, hormonal replacement therapy at 9 to become a girl, and you tell, as we just learned in Ohio, right? The Ohio couple who had their child taken from them. This is Ohio, the Republican governor. I guess you could call Kasich a Republican, not really. Never mind. In Ohio, you had a situation where a middle school boy wanted to transition, girl wanted to transition to a boy, wanted to start taking testosterone. Mom and dad said no. I think she was 9 years old. Mom and dad said no. At which point the state took, and the student complained to her teachers, who filed with the Child Protective Services. They took the child away and are giving her the hormone replacement therapy without their parents' consent. That happens now, right? This is what happens when you get here. But we're still, even though the resistance is thin, we can still fight. The fact that you're sitting here tonight is a kind of fighting, right? The John Birch Society, the perpetual thorn in the side of progressive educrats. They're still functioning, right? And functioning at a high level. So this is what we face. The real important news, and I can't say this more directly but more sincerely. You can't fix this problem anymore. You cannot reclaim the government schools, public schools from kindergarten to high school. You can't fix it. There is nothing you can do about it. States like Texas, whose own legislature formally declared we will not have Common Core in the state, it's in every one of your school districts. Every single one of them. Nothing you can do about it. In Wisconsin, Republicans, for a couple more months, they control everything in Wisconsin. The fact that they've controlled it for now 10 years and done nothing is exactly why they won't control it again, starting in November. They've already lost the Supreme Court, right? Which they had. They just lost that. And it's going to get a lot worse. Because even when we put Republicans in power, what do they do? See, Democrats, when you put Democrats in power, they immediately start pushing as much as they can. Even if you scale back half of it, they still advance the ball 50 yards. Yeah. Look at us. We put Republicans in office, and what do you get? They start with now as the new normal, right? Did Donald Trump actually ever rescind the transgender bathroom policy? No. No, he didn't, right? Donald Trump promised us he was going to get rid of the Department of Education. No, he didn't. In fact, he made it stronger. The woman he put in charge of the Department of Education is a nice woman, but she's not getting rid of Common Core, and she's not getting rid of the Department of Education. And you can pretend all you want that you can fix this, but not when it's controlled by the feds, you can't. And your universities are the same way. The only real way to avoid the university problem is to find alternatives for your kids, and I'll talk about that before we're done, or mediate the damage. The system's going to have to implode before it fixes itself. But look, we can fight. You can homeschool your kids. You can still send your kids to good private schools if you want to. There are many ways to get a college education without getting into debt or without succumbing to politics, and I'll share some of those with you. But this is the irremediable problem here. And I've actually had moms, at every university I've taught at, I've actually had colleagues who have told me, we want homeschool kids. As one professor in Oklahoma State told me, I look forward to kicking Jesus right out of them. They want your kids, because your kids are good students, your kids are prepared for college, much more so than public school kids are if you homeschool them. All the surveys show that. But you also have those pesky values that they love to deconstruct. It's amazing to me how many of my colleagues gripe about having another boring class full of 25 white kids. And then one young lady shows up with tattoos and piercing, and she becomes the focus of the course, right? It's like, the entire premise of the system. If you still think the primary purpose of an introductory math class, or an introductory science class, a gen ed class for your kid is going to be science or biology or chemistry or math or English, it's not. My university, gen ed, those 2 years of courses that you have to take before you can major, right? That's one way to avoid this trap. At all the major universities, before your kid can major in accounting or chemistry or business, he's got to do the 2 years, right? Take an English class, take an art history. And as a liberal arts teacher, you know, it's a good idea, but the whole premise of that was that you were going to get exposed to a whole lot of different ideas. I'll take a course in Shakespeare here, I'll take a course in the New Testament there, I'll take a course in 20th century art in my art history class, and by doing all 60 credits, 60 credits in gen ed, typically, by doing all those different courses, I have a pretty diverse view of opinions. That's not true anymore. All the gen eds now make the same points. I don't know if you're aware of this, but universities all across the country, including mine, gen ed science. You want to be a high school English teacher, you don't need a whole lot of science. But you got to take your one lab science. At University of Wisconsin, what we've done is we've created feminist biology. So if you're a gen ed person and you don't want to have to do real science, you can get credit for your science credit by taking feminist biology, which is basically an explanation about how Western science is sexist against women. It's not scientific. And look, if you're not, and you get this, right? If you're not a scientist and have to take a lab course, which one do you think they're going to take? They're going to take the one that doesn't do any science. How about cultural math? Your kids can get their math requirement done with cultural math. How math is nothing more than a cultural construct, and how right answers don't matter in math anyway. That's the whole premise of the course. How about green chemistry, where you don't have to worry about atomic tables and all that. All you have to worry about in green chemistry is the nature of environmentalism. How to use or fight the great chemical companies when it comes to a healthy environment. And this is how they get around it. So in other words, all gen ed courses now have become the same. All 60 credits before your kids really even settle down into accounting or chemistry or business. Almost 2 full years of their education will be dedicated to the same 4 or 5 ideas: feminism, Marxism, racialism, environmentalism, transgenderism, over and over and over again. The best way to avoid the problem is simply don't send your kids to the big schools for the first 2 years. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. But this is where we are. I wish I could paint a happier picture about it. I just said, your kid wants to major in business at UT Austin. Pretty good chance that she can find 3 or 4 not liberal professors. Maybe not conservative, but she can find 3 or 4 non-liberals to get through her program. Your kid wants to be a high school English teacher at the University of Texas, Austin, forget it. Austin, forget it. I gotta find anybody who doesn't look anything. It's all the same stuff again and again and again. So a lot depends on what they major in. So if you have some influence and try to guide kids right, you know, nobody needs to get $100,000 in debt for a creative writing degree. They just don't. Or a women's studies degree. Unnecessary. What I'd like to do is show you one of my experiences and talk about it. I will start with, for about the first 12 years I was teaching, every day, the first day of every semester with my freshmen and sophomores, I gave quizzes to these kids before I even told them my name. I asked them 20 basic questions about American history. I wanted to see what they knew coming out of high school, right? These are some juniors, seniors, some juniors, sophomores, and a lot of freshmen. I think I gave almost 1,200 of these quizzes over a 12-year period. And I collated the data. Matter of fact, it actually made the news. And so I'll start with that and see how this worked out here.
In becoming college students overwhelmingly believe that slavery was invented by Americans and is an exclusively American phenomenon. That, according to Professor Pesta of the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh, who spent more than a decade testing first-year students at 5 different colleges. In an interview with the website The College Fix, Pesta said many of his students, quote, came to college without the basic rudiments of American history or Western culture, and their reading level was pretty low. Pesta said on one quiz, 29 out of 32 students knew Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, but just 3 out of the 32 correctly identified him as a former president.
And that's true. Wow. 3 different times while I gave those quizzes. I gave that quiz to, again, about 1,200 families, kids. 3 times I had a situation where 32, 33 kids, only 2 or 3 actually understood that Jefferson was a president. All 29 of the 33 or 32 knew that the one thing they knew about Jefferson was that he owned slaves. Well, the thing I should start with is exactly right. One of the things that I came to see from these quizzes, one of the questions I asked them is to name one other slave-holding nation in the history of the world. Just one. Just one. Many of these kids were raised Christian. They couldn't even come up with Pharaoh, right? They couldn't name a single one, most of them. They're convinced, and slavery is a horror, and one of the glories of Western culture, it gets bashed a lot. One of the great glories of Western culture is that we are willing to look at our flaws. We have been for hundreds of years. We're one of the only cultures out there that categorically teaches kids what we did wrong. To this day, Japanese high school students don't learn anything about the Bataan Death March. They learn nothing of the rape of Nanking. Japanese high school students learn nothing about the fact that the kind of medical experiments Japanese doctors were working on other Asian peoples, in some instances made Hitler look weak. They don't learn it. All they learn in Japanese schools is the atomic bomb. They don't learn about Pearl Harbor either. They learn about the atomic bomb. We in the West for a long time, that's why Western, and I tell my students this all the time, if Western student culture is so irremediably bad that it can't be reclaimed, why is it that human rights, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, why did these things grow up in the West? How come they didn't grow up anywhere else? And there's no answer for that. They have no answer for that. But our kids, these kids are coming to college, and they think that slavery is a uniquely American problem. They don't know it, and if you think that, I understand why our young kids hate this country. I understand it. I understand why these young kids want to reject every aspect of our culture. They don't know any better. They think we're worse than everybody else. And by the way, if you lay our record in certain areas alongside certain countries today, we don't look that bad. People forget there's a slave trade ongoing right now. My kids know nothing about it. It's in South Africa. It's African people being carried away and sent to Islamic countries. No one's at least been interested in that. Because for the white liberal professor to call out Islam, that would be multicultural, right? So we never do it. Meanwhile, real people are suffering now. These are the stories that don't get told to the kids. Give me some of the background on these quizzes that I gave. So the project, I called them cultural literacy quizzes. I gave them consistently for almost 11, 12 years at 5 different universities: Purdue, University of Tennessee at Martin, Ursinus College, Oklahoma State University. Paperwork, but I would tally all the results from every single class. Despite not saving all the paperwork, I did tally the key responses, and here's what I came up with in the final analysis. Excluding the United States, name one slaveholding nation or people in the last 2,500 years. Based on 1,206 responses, 965 out of 1,206 students, 80% left it blank or indicated that they did not know. 8 out of 10 of them couldn't name one, not one. That's shocking, but it explains a lot, right? Again, how do you fix this? You can't. You can't. Your educators, your professors, your teachers, the structure of your schools are convinced that America is the problem. Freedom, liberty, the Constitution, all of our values, all of our wealth was stolen, not earned, robbed. We raped and pillaged. That's what your kids are being taught again and again and again. And they get it in kindergarten now, and they get it when they enter graduate school now. It's the same thing again and again. Right? But that shouldn't surprise. This is before. This is mostly before we further miseducated them about the issues. Circle all the following who served as President of the United States: Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Paul Revere, and Alexander Hamilton. 801 of 1,206, 66%, correctly got Jefferson. So overall, 66% of kids did recognize him as president. The poorest result occurred 3 times, where only 3 students in those particular classes chose Jefferson. Franklin was circled 60%. So before we get too happy about 66% recognizing Jefferson, 60% thought Ben Franklin was the president, 40% Hamilton, and Paul Revere, almost 30% chose him. All right. Regarding Thomas Jefferson, circle each true statement. He was a general in the Revolutionary War. He defeated Lee in the Battle of Gettysburg. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He owned slaves. He was president of the United States. A whopping 1,121, 93%, identified Jefferson as a slaveholder. Only 62%, a full 62%, thought he was a Revolutionary War general. 66% identified him as president. We saw that in the last slide. And 40% thought that he defeated Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg. By the way, this is the same generation that's blindly calling for statues to be taken down now, for schools to be named. There's a little community in Florida, I think it is, no, California, that is now going to rename all of its streets, a little town of 5,000. It's going to do all of its street names and rename them after women, because too few of them were. So now all of them, the street names will be named after women. In one sense, this is the biggie for me. These next 2 are the money shots for me. In one sense, define capitalism. 75%, 75, 3 out of 4 of them, define capitalism in part by using the words greedy, selfish, or unfair, or unambiguously related variants. 75% of them, that was their attitude. The semester before the election that brought Donald Trump to office, I had a senior class of 32 kids, 29 of whom were going to vote for Bernie Sanders. This is before Hillary whacked her knees out from under her. And I asked them why. I said, I'm curious, why? Because socialism is fairness, they said. That's fair. And when I pushed it a little bit further, well, we have student loans, and he's going to waive them for us. Right? So you took out loans that you knew you weren't going to pay back. You took out loans to major in things that you knew you couldn't possibly pay it back. And fairness to you is stiffing the American taxpayer on that. Yeah, but to them, that's how they see it, right? 75%. And then this one is the one that I think says it all. In one sentence, define socialism. 85% use the words fairness or equality, or unambiguously related variants. That's a huge, huge number. And the tragedy is, as with slavery, ask them to explain it. Ask them, watch your heart break. Ask them to tell you what they know about socialism. When I tell them that there's been about 150 million dead people in the last 120 years because of socialism, they don't know what to make of that. First of all, they have no way to process that. When I tell them that, I always ask them, okay, 120 million dead, more or less, that's probably a conservative estimate under the socialist regime since 1900. I said, okay, now that you know that, and I make them fact check me, I say, you go home and check that, right? Then I ask them, without getting them a chance to study it, I say, how many did Hitler kill? And when I ask them that, they reason with themselves, well, if socialism, which is a cosmic good, managed to kill 120 million people, I always get billions, right? Then Hitler must have killed billions, right? The question is they don't know. But if it's true, if they take me at my word, 120 million dead in the name of socialism, then Hitler must have killed exponentially bigger than that, and really fries their minds when I ask them what the word Nazi means. Okay? And I hit him with those bad German, right? National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, right? The National Socialist German Workers' Party. They just don't know how to handle it. But nobody does them. They're 24 years old, these class of seniors, the 24-year-old kids, and no one had ever told them that before. They had not had any sense of that.
My favorite question is, what does Gestapo mean?
Oh, what does the Gestapo mean? Exactly. Say it a little bit louder.
Gestapo
So they can hear it.
means federal.
Yeah, the federal, right? The federal government that they let them jail.
How do you get so many kids that don't have any curiosity, nothing else?
Do you understand? That's a fantastic question. Here's the problem. When they're told that their subjective feelings are true, as long as they align with liberal values, when they're told that from elementary school on, what is curiosity? They're already morally right. Well, the way we treat these Parkland kids, right? I'm sorry that you had that happened to your friends. I'm sorry that that terrible thing happened to your friends in that school. But that does not confer on you logic or comprehension or understanding or wisdom or experience. We're telling kids at younger ages now they're good kids based on what they feel. If you feel that the inequality in wealth in this country is a bad thing, then you're a good person. If you feel that everybody should, and we're talking 6 and 7 and 8 and 10-year-old minds that can't distinguish these things. You're telling 8 and 10-year-olds, right? This guy has this much money and you only have this much money. Is that fair? No. Well, that's good that you feel that way. What happens to curiosity? It's the same thing that happens to our professors. In a university system where everybody thinks the same, in my case, it's funny. There are very few me's on college campuses. But you know what there's a lot more of? Middle-of-the-road liberals, what we used to call classical liberals, good, solid Democrats. They're the ones getting fired. There's just so many of us to fire, right? You know who's really coming in the crosshairs now? This shows you how bad the ideology's gotten. If you are not sufficiently liberal, they're coming after you. Most of the professors who've been fired, think about that guy at Evergreen State University in Washington, remember? When you had the riot there? This was a biology professor, a man of immaculate liberal progressive qualifications. And he was ordered off campus by a group of young radicals because he was white. The professor, he was told, don't teach your classes, we're ordering you off campus. And he, God bless him, he said, no, I will teach my classes. And the university all came this close to firing him before they pulled back, when national outcry got great. He was a Jewish fellow, this guy. And so after they didn't fire him and the campus protest died down, he sued them and won a $4 million settlement from the university. The university refused to protect him doing his job. They let these kids order everybody else off campus. What the kids did is they marched through campus one day, ordering all non-whites to vacate the university for the entire day. As a show of, right, social justice. We'll have only people of color on campus for this entire day. And most of the professors walked off. $4 million later, this is the problem. And this is exactly what happened in the Nazi regime and the Soviet regime too. What happens? Once you get rid of your political enemies, then people not quite as extreme as you become your enemies. We're seeing that in college campuses now. The firings, the terminations, the warnings, all the shots fired across the bow now are coming at professors not because they're conservative, but because they're not orthodox enough in their progressivism. We're at that stage now, and it's happening to your kids too. You know, California and other states now. California, just yesterday, raised the cost of tuition for the state schools of California, but exempted illegal immigrants from that. So if you're an illegal immigrant in California, right, you get tuition at the cost that the other kids have to pay, although most of them don't pay for it at all. Schools like Smith College now have reserved scholarships just for illegal students. So if there's no hemming about this whatsoever. And our kids are coming in. And I tell my university kids all the time, when I taught high school for a little bit, I said the same thing to them. Look, the academic left, the left is telling you, your teachers, your professors, your high school teachers are telling you that race is just a social construct. Gender is just a social construct, right? You are whatever you say you are. You're an 8-year-old boy who thinks he's a girl, then we'll drop everything and pretend you're a girl. We'll let you shower with the girls and sleep in girls' dorms on field trips. You can do all that stuff just because you say so. Remember people like Rachel Dolezal, right? The whiter-than-white woman in Washington who pretended she was black, yes, right? Ran a local NAACP chapter, and what was the response? Well, that's okay. If she wants to be black, that's okay. So my point is, if you are what you say you are, and anybody who asks you to verify it is now a villain, right? Yeah. Check every box. Just check them all, right? What are they going to say? You don't look Indian? I'm going to get right up in your grill, right? I don't look at who. You can tell what an Indian looks like, and they back. Elizabeth Warren is a classic example, right? Faux Kahanas, right? I mean, she's unbelievable. And a couple months ago, because of all the outcry, she was going to run for president, but this Indian thing is derailing it. Because she keeps insisting she's Cherokee, and the Cherokee keep insisting, no way you not, right? And it's funny how many Democrats side with her and not the tribe. It just goes to show you, right? When one of their own is concerned, native politics be damned. And so Elizabeth Warren, a couple months ago, came out and said, she's going to take the saliva test. They're going to let her swab the inside of her cheek and prove this. And at the last minute, pulled back. Nope, not going to do it, because you know why. But she took a prestigious Harvard faculty scholarship designated for Native Americans. She took it away from a Native American candidate and became, right? Fraud. Fraud. Well, she is. Fraud, exactly. So, well, the last part of the talk is going to be about some solutions to all of this. Thought I'd at least have a little fun with you. So I've collected some writing samples over the years to give you a sense of where my college kids are. And so here are some, and I'm a professor of Renaissance literature, right? So here you go. Socrates was a famous Greek teacher who went around giving people advice. They killed him. Socrates died from an overdose of wedlock. That one kind of makes sense, right? It's possible, right? So Socrates died from an overdose of wedlock. Then came the Middle Ages. King Alfred conquered the Danes. King Arthur lived in the age of chivalry. King Harold mustered his troops before the Battle of Hastings. Joan of Arc was canonized by Bernard Shaw, and victims of the Black Death grew boobs on their neck. Finally, Magna Carta provided that no free men should be hanged twice for the same. Good one? The Renaissance, and I put the titles in. Didn't even know he was Jewish, right? The Renaissance was an age in which more individuals felt the value of their human being. Martin Luther was nailed to the church door in Wittenberg for selling papal indulgences. He died a horrible death, being excommunicated by a bull. Gutenberg invented the Bible. Sir Walter Raleigh is a historical figure because he invented cigarettes. Another important invention was the circulation of blood. Sir Francis Drake circumcised the world with a 100-foot clipper. The greatest writer of the Renaissance was William Shakespeare. Shakespeare never made much money and is famous only because of his plays. He lived at Windsor with his merry wives, writing tragedies, comedies, and errors. In one of Shakespeare's famous plays, Hamlet rations out his situation by relieving himself in a long soliloquy. In another, Lady Macbeth tries to convince Macbeth to kill the king by attacking his manhood. My kids are kind of crotch-centric in their writing. Romeo and Juliet are an example of a heroic couplet. Writing at the same time as Shakespeare was Miguel Cervantes. He wrote Don Quixote. The next great author was John Milton. Milton wrote Paradise Lost. Then his wife died, and he wrote Paradise Regained. The government of England was a limited mockery. Henry VIII found walking difficult because he had an abbess on his knee. Queen Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen. As queen, she was a success. When Elizabeth exposed herself before her troops, they all shouted, hurrah! Then her navy went out and defeated the Spanish armadillo. And this is one of my favorites. The Emperor Tiberius fell into a coma and died. Now, what makes that special to me is because I wrote back on the paper, it must have been a very violent period. I mean, you laugh because you stop crying. By way of entering the last little phase here, so what do we do about this? First thing is, and I mean this sincerely, no kid needs college at 17 or 18. Nobody. The average graduating age for an undergraduate is now 25 years old. Did you know that? Your kids can't get a 4-year degree in 4 years. Remember when you went to college? You took 5 or sometimes maybe in 6 classes a semester to get done? These kids can barely handle 3. They're just not qualified. So it's taking them, the average graduate now is about 25. They start at 18, 19, takes them 5 or even 6 years to get a degree. If your kids No kid needs college that young. They come right out of high school, all they know is school for the first 12 years of their life when they're paying attention. Here's what I would say. If your homeschool, private school kid, if your smart kid doesn't go to college until she's 20, she's still going to graduate ahead of all the other kids, right, 24. There's a huge difference, but you can give them a 2-year period, a 2 or 3 year window after high school. Let them live at home, work and save money. So that in 3 years, if they go back, and many of them won't, because they'll find they don't need it. If they do go back after 3 years, they can pay for it. Or they can at least pay for most of it. And what we did is let the kids live at home, right? Let the kids live at home and give them a car, promise them a car or something, let them drive back and forth to work. But let them try things, let them intern. Let them pursue a dream. Let them do something. Go work, try to do an entry-level job at a company somewhere and see. What's going to happen is in 3 years, some of those kids, particularly the boys, will recognize that they're not interested in the stultifying atmosphere of a classroom. They want hands-on stuff. We're paying, right now in North Dakota, there are so few qualified welders in this country. We're paying welders $120 an hour, 60 hours guaranteed to work, 6-month shifts. In New York City, liberal Mecca, nobody knows how to fix a toilet. There's a huge shortage of plumbers, mechanics, carpenters, contractors, so that the average person living in a tiny little box apartment in New York is paying hundreds of dollars an hour for basic carpentry services. We are losing all of these things.
Well, one quick thing to add that. In New York, a couple, if they work Uber, they're guaranteed 14 grand a month. 7 grand
Just
each.
driving people
Young
around.
married couple, 7 grand each guaranteed.
And in New York, that's not enough to live on, but it's not bad. But you understand what I'm telling you here. And then, after 3 years, your kid's got a lot of money in the bank, right? Because he's been living at home. After 3 years, if they decide to go then, they may only go for a certificate. Or I just need a concentration in these 4 classes. I don't need the full degree. I need some specialized training. I don't need 2 years, 60 credits of liberal arts courses. And here's another thing. Think about the difference between a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old in terms of being able to understand what they're getting. That's a huge deal, right? And not only that, if your 20-year-old has worked for a few years and now sees what it's like to deal with sane people in a hardworking meritocracy environment, they will see through the backward socialistic premises of their professors. The kids who get lost, and never forget this, please, the kids who get lost are the ones for whom campus is everything. They never set foot off it. Their dorms are there, they sleep there, their meals are handed to them there, all their social opportunities there take place in the dorms. They never get off campus. And if you have to send your kids to school at 17 or at 20, do your best to make sure they have a 12 or 15-hour-a-week job. College is so watered down from what it was even when I started going to it. So watered down now that your kids could easily take 4 classes and work 15 hours a week if you've trained them the right way and not miss a beat. It's not that complicated. But if they have a job or something that pulls them off campus 2 or 3 days a week, and they have a chance to socialize and interact with people outside the realm of that rarefied hothouse greenery, greenhouse of progressivism, they'll see how vapid progressivism is. This is the thing that bothers me. It doesn't take me but 6 weeks to completely decimate all their progressive thinking. Not because I'm a particularly good teacher, but because there's just nothing to it. I don't tell, look, I'm smart enough not to proselytize. I get in trouble, not because I don't walk around, I have to keep my head down, I don't walk around screaming my progressive bona fides at faculty meetings. What happens is that the kids talk. After a couple of periods with me, so they're hearing things that they didn't hear before. And they go tell their other teachers, oh, Dr. Pesta said this today. He said, what? And the whole game's afoot. As a teacher, the only compliment I've ever gotten as a teacher that I like, kids with this level of unprepared delusion, when they tell you you're a great teacher, you learn to take that with a great big hunk of salt. But the one that matters to me is when the kids say to me, and I hear it a lot, thankfully, how come no one's ever told me that before? These kids are upset. They're 23 years old, and no one told them that. They didn't know that there were other slave-holding nations. They didn't know that Native Americans fought wars and enslaved people before Europeans got here. They didn't know those kinds of things. No one ever told them about the Aztecs, right? No one ever told them about the Inca and the Maya. Empires are bad, unless they're indigenous empires, and then we just look the other way, right?
So they feel lied to.
Well, they feel betrayed, right? They feel betrayed. And that's a great thing. And once you get them to see it, once you get them to understand, and I do this every semester, I put the words liberal and conservative on the board. And I ask them, point to the word liberal. Have you ever, in your 20 years of education, have you ever heard that word liberal criticized, taken apart, challenged? And to this day, I've been doing this for 8 years now, not once, not one time in any class, not once has somebody said, oh, I heard it. Never. To them, like socialism equals fair, liberal equals good. It is unarguable. Liberalism to them is an absolute synonym for good. Then I point to the word conservative. Have you ever heard a good word about this in your classroom? Every now and then a kid, I had a conservative teacher, but overwhelmingly it's no. Ask yourself, I say, can that possibly be true? Are there any other two polar opposite words I can put on the board that you could say the same thing about? Do you honestly believe that the only logical, legitimate way to see the world is this way? There can be no idea. And they hang their heads. So why didn't I think of this, right? Because no one's ever introduced conservatism in a positive way to them. And no one's ever challenged liberalism. It becomes part of their specular DNA, right? But once they see, I don't have to convince them the other side's right. I just have to get them to see, by asking them, that what they think they know can't be true 100% of the time. And then the walls start crashing around them. When you're reading Shakespeare, who, by the way, is a remarkable Christian writer, one of the great Christian writers of the Western canon, staggeringly Christian and staggeringly civil, a civilization builder. When they read Shakespeare and they start to see these things, right? Because they come to respect Shakespeare after I could teach them how to read it. I mentioned in my afternoon lecture, when I started teaching Shakespeare 25 years ago, I would teach 11, 12, 13 plays a semester. That's like one a week. 3 periods once a week. I can't do it. I'm teaching 4 now. 4 for an entire 14-week semester because I have to teach them how to read. Literally, I go through with these kids. We open up to the first act of Hamlet, and we start going subject-verb, right? Here's a sentence. Goes on for 4 lines. They don't know what it means. Tell me where the subject and the verb is, and I can get them to do that. And slowly, for basically 4 or 5 weeks, we work through Hamlet. Something they should be able to do, should be able to read in 1 or 2 nights. It takes us 5 weeks. But at the end of those 5 weeks, they get it. And their eyes are open, right? That's how you have to do it. The problem is that there's nobody doing it. Our kids are not stupid, they're just impossibly miseducated. And that kind of ignorance in writing that you see, you laugh at it, but that's our fault too. Because do you know this? As a professor of English, I can tell you it's true. The mandatory freshman writing classes your kids have to take in college, they are not allowed to teach grammar to your children. Your kids still have to take a mandatory freshman writing class, but now grammar, punctuation, capitalization are all considered racist. There is no one right way to speak. There is no one way to look at things. If somebody wants to speak trashy, if somebody wants to use the F word every other word, it's not our job to tell them how to talk. So your English professors in mandatory freshman writing seminars don't teach grammar, syntax, don't teach correctness. In other words, English professors don't teach the kids how to write. What they do instead is teach them social justice. They give them a topic, gay marriage, force them to write essays about it that aren't graded on the grammar. They are graded on the degree to which their position mirrors the professor's position, right? So and the kids know this, they tell me this all the time, right? I don't have to think and I don't have to read the books when I have a liberal teacher. When I have a progressive teacher, I have to read the book. I figure out in 5 minutes if she's a Marxist or a feminist or an environmentalist or if her big deal is homosexuality. And then without reading the book, I simply spout off about that. It works every single time, I said. This is where the critical thinking goes, the curiosity goes to die, right? To be curious and challenge, and look, the professors aren't that stupid. Your A-student daughter who challenges a liberal professor isn't going to go from an A to an F. She will go to an A to a B, right? She will go from an A to a B minus. That's what they do. They don't do, very seldom, they're not stupid. If an A-student kid who can write well suddenly getting Fs, that sends up red flags. The kid's got a case. But if an A, a genuine A, is now a C+, how do you argue that? Purely subjective, right? And so, boom, that's what they'll do to your kids. And that's how they handle it. But the kids, so curiosity, critical thinking, those things go away. And so while we're winding down on this topic, a couple of things. So no kid needs college right out of high school. In fact, the worst time to send your kid to college is right out of high school. The worst kids I have at the university are the ones that are fresh out of high school. The best ones are the ones that go away for a couple of years. Because then and if your kid does decide after 3 years, she absolutely has to go to college, guess what? She'll take it much more seriously. She'll take the expense of it much more seriously. She will take the experience much more seriously. Because she saw what, she was out doing something that she realizes was a hobby, or that she realizes she can't make a life out of. And she's coming back now with a whole different attitude and worldview than she would have had at 17. Those are important things. Also, that 2 first years, that 60 course credits, 60 course credits, thousands and thousands of dollars to get her gen ed degree about the same politically correct issues. Do it at the community college. Every community college in Texas is linked to the state system. If your daughter does 2 years of community college down the road from you and lives at home, when she goes after those 2 years, if she needs it, after she has her associate's degree, she could go to UT Austin to do her final 2 years. Her final diploma will say UT Austin. It won't say local Texas community college. All the community colleges have reciprocal arrangements now. So why spend all that money? 4 times what it costs to go to community college. Why spend 4 times what it costs? Send your kid to UT Austin at 17 to spend 2 full years being bombarded by social justice pedagogy, when she could stay at home for 1/4 of the price, work, make money, and save it, have a real life outside of campus, and then decide after 2 years whether she even needs to go further. And if she does have to go to UT Austin then, guess what? She doesn't have to take the gen ed courses. She can just focus on chemistry, or she can just focus on accounting, right? Will she still get some of the garbage? Yeah, but a lot less. How much better off are you and she then? These are ways you can help this. And what trumps everything I've told you so far, if there's one piece, if I was only allowed to give you one piece of advice, it would be this. Never, ever let your kids live in the dorms. Never. The classroom is bad, but people are paying attention to the classrooms. If a professor goes overboard, you see all these kids now who are filming their professors, right? Going on anti-Trump screeds and getting in trouble, and some of them even getting fired for it. The professors know that somebody's paying attention. No one's paying attention to what happens to your kids in the dormitories. Do you know that now the people in charge of dormitories are kids who have gone to graduate school for 2 years to get a degree in dormitory studies? You can't get hired now without it. In fact, a lot of universities will hire kids, 25, 26-year-olds, and pay for them to get their dormitory degree while they're watching your kid's dorm. And the thing about dormitory studies is, there's nothing to study. It is 100% pure Marxist social justice theory, right? How do you break down kids sexually? How do you encourage bisexuality? How do you sexualize the kids in the dorm? How do you enable them to pursue a libertine lifestyle? How do you, already, here's what, to give you an example of how goofy college is. So, it is now considered sexist and misogynist to have male and female dorms, right? To have dorms for girls and dorms for boys, that's considered patriarchal and misogynist. So we're forcing not just girls and boys to live on the different floors, right? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, boys would live on one floor, girls on the second, which didn't really mean anything, but it was, now, they're actually living in the same dorm rooms. Girls and boys can choose to live with the other gender if they want to, and they're all mingled on the same floors, and many universities are making the bathrooms and the showers gender neutral, right? Meanwhile, it's sexist and patriarchal to have separate dorms for boys and girls. Universities all across this country are now building separate dorms where transgender kids can live with themselves alone, where African American kids can live by themselves. African American dorms. Explain the logic of this to me. To put boys and girls together, to not put boys and girls together, to allow boys and girls to be separate is sexist. But to build dorms for particular races of kids or particular genders of kids, that now is the rage now. This kind of inconsistent liberal stupidity is exactly what your kids are getting. The dorms are much worse for your kids because the people running the dorms with these ridiculous dorm degrees are all about just pushing kids' liberal values. That's where all the sex clinics take place, where the girls are ushered into one basement and the boys another, and the boys are lectured about the rape culture, right? The boys are told basically you're all rapists. University of Wisconsin-Madison requires incoming freshman males, boys, to take a course called Toxic Masculinity, where young 18-year-old boys are told as freshmen that your masculinity is rape culture. By behaving like boys, you are participating in the rape of women, even if you never touch one. Girls, meanwhile, are shepherded to other basements and given sex toy displays. I had a kid who's ROTC, straight shooting kid, conservative kid, but he needed extra money, so he became, so that the dorm people with the degrees are in charge of the dorm. On charge of each floor is a student, right, an RA. This kid was an RA for his dorm. And every August, 2 weeks before classes started, he would come to class 2 weeks before the kids got there to learn his programming, he called it. But he was also, because he was in charge of a floor of boys and girls, every fall he was given a year's supply of birth control that you pay for, by the way. You have no idea what fees you pay when you send your kids to college. You are paying for this stuff, right? And so he was given what was supposed to be a year's supply of contraceptives, including the morning after abortion pill. And he told me that after the second weekend on campus, when the kids were back, he had given it all away. He had to go back and get more of it. After 2 weeks on campus, he had given it all away. And your kids are paying for this. The cost of a college education would be exactly half if you pulled out all those stupid environmentalism fees, right, for birth control in the dorm, which most of your kids who don't live in dorms will never take advantage of. But you're paying for it anyway, right? That's why it's so expensive. So he quit, he couldn't do it anymore after that, he just walked away from the job. But that's what happened, and no one's watching those dorms. So the other thing you can do, and I think would be useful, if your kid goes at 20 instead of 17, if she saved a buttload of money because she's been working, she has experience working, right? Now she wants to go to, she's going to go back and get her last 2-year degree, got her associate's degree, negotiate with her, right? Try to find a roommate, have her live in a small campus apartment, a small apartment off campus. Get her out of those dorms. And that's it, that's the key, right? Having a foot in another world makes, especially if she's a little older, makes all the difference. Those things you can do and get them through it, right? But they're not going to change these universities. And don't get me wrong, is your kid still going to get some political leftism at community college? Yeah, because who are the community college professors? 9 times out of 10, they're just they're professors who couldn't get a job with no jobs, right? So they take their PhDs and teach community college, and their same angry liberalism is there. But look, your kids can't, there are no dorms for community colleges, number one. Number two, many of the community college classes are online. So even if you send it, they can do half their coursework online, get it over with. It's really hard, I've tried it. I've taught online. It's really hard to politicize an online class because the professor's not there looking over your shoulder. You can do it, you can only assign left-wing stuff, but it's a lot harder to politicize those classes. All those things taken in the aggregate, stepping back, and it'll be my final comment, I'll throw it, I don't know what time it is. I'll throw it open to some questions if you have any. We're doing okay. Final question, comment I'll make to you is, I go back to what I said before. Many of our kids don't need college. The fact that 4 out of 10 of my university students, 40% of them, don't belong. Either they cannot do the work intellectually, or attitudinally they won't do it. 4 out of 10. You understand the problem? 40% to 50% of my kids don't belong in college, but we can't get rid of 40 and 50. If we get rid of 50% of our students, the university goes out of business. 50% of dorm rooms not sold, 50% of meal plans not eaten, 50% of classrooms empty. So you know what we're doing, right? We're we're taking kids who don't belong, and then because we've taken them, we have to make them succeed. So we're socially promoting them. We're teaching them nothing except politics and giving them degrees. That's why you see these college graduates now at job fairs. Remember when you were in college and the job fairs would come to campus? They don't come very much often in Wisconsin anymore. Why? Talk to the CEOs. We don't want to hire your people. Look, when these kids graduate from your school, they're 24, 25. They've got $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 of debt. They think that their college degree entitles them to a top-end job. When I offer them an entry-level position, they won't take it, right? And they couldn't take it anyway because it doesn't pay enough to pay off their student loans. But we're better served hiring some kid fresh out of high school to do a 2-year internship. Yeah, we don't pay him much, but he's got a job, and we watched we brought 10 interns in for the last 2 years. The top 3 of them, they don't know this. The 3 that work the hardest, we're going to give them full-time jobs. Because we've seen that they're trainable. One CEO said to me, I can train one of your kids in 6 months to do everything we need them to do. It takes you 6 years to graduate them. And we won't pay them much, but they won't be in debt. That's the wave of the future, right? So that's my piece. But if you have any thoughts or questions, I'd be glad to take them. Yeah.
When you first spoke, you said the legislature was the only thing that could change our campuses. Can you expound on what?
Theoretically, most state universities, like the University of Texas, are obligated to the legislature, right? The legislature has authority over them in terms of funding, in terms of a lot of things. University of Wisconsin, interesting, it used to be that way. Governor Walker, another dumb thing he did, Governor Walker gave control of the University of Wisconsin system back to the Board of Regents, which was a death knell for people like me. If I get in trouble, if I get in trouble again at the university, I have now no recourse beyond the Board of Regents, who are all liberals. Before that, I could go to the legislature, and I have gone to the legislature for help, because they're the ones who have to fund the universities. And if there's one thing these socialist universities want, is money. Isn't that ironic? Right? Think about this. There is no commodity in American life, no commodity, that has gone up inflation-wise more than tuition. Not one thing. And yet, we're training kids to hate gas companies. I ask my students all the time, raise your hand if you ever got a gallon of gas that didn't work. Raise your hand if you took a class that was meaningless. Right? So why aren't you, where's the Occupy the Quad movement? Huh? Why aren't you antifying your own professors, right? And that's not the way to go. So in places like Texas, what you've got is they held the purse strings. And if they want to, particularly with a state like this where Republicans dominate, they could say, until you pass some clause at the university that requires worldview diversity. You're doing fine on all the other diversities. How about you require worldview diversity? In other words, we're going to screen not just for race or class or gender. We're going to screen so that we have different worldviews, different political backgrounds. That's easy enough to do. Just one more stupid protected class for a stupid protected system, right? We're not giving you any money until you do it. But you watch how fast they grumble and do it. But you tell me, why won't your Republican, in a state like Texas in particular, why won't they do it? Why won't they exercise their control over it? They won't. And it has a lot to do with cronyism. It has a lot to do with how much money and kickbacks. The teachers' unions are hugely strong. They're not afraid of you, because you're 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 people. The unions can turn out 100,000 to protest if they need to, right? And it's all of that back and forth BS that stops. It's why when we elect Republicans, sadly, they don't really do much to help us in the aggregate. But they have the key of the purse. But then again, so do you. If your legislators won't use the power to withhold money from the schools, from the universities, until they at least play fair, right? Many states, I'll give Walker credit for this, we did pass in Wisconsin a student bill of rights, right, that says students have a right to, right? And the universities, they changed it, they watered it down, but we've got something at least passed. You can do that. But the other thing you've got is your money, right? Especially why give 4 years of your money to UT Texas, to Texas Austin, when you're paying a lot more for those first 2 years than you have to, right? The universities respond to money. And I will say this, there's a bubble coming. You think that housing bubble was bad? At my university, we've lost maybe 25%, and it's going to get worse. So there are some schools, the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, a branch campus, they actually just eliminated the entire humanities program. $5 million in debt. They got rid of English, history, philosophy, art history, theater, now all they've got is nursing and biotech and IT, and that's what's going to happen. We've dug a big grave for ourselves.
Did you say they've lost 25% enrollment?
Not so much Madison, the big school, but all the branch campuses have. What's happening is the smaller schools, the branch campuses are drying up. There's just not, they're huge. The vast majority of your state education budget goes to the big schools, goes to UT Austin, A&M. The small branch schools get little. Same thing in Wisconsin. I teach at University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh. Madison gets like 80% of the state money. The rest of us, there's 27 University of Wisconsin schools, universities. Madison gets 80% of the money. The other 26 get 20% of it. So those are drying up and going away. But once they're doomed, and what happened at Stephen's point, just eliminating the humanities, that's going to happen in more schools, then it will hit the big university hard too. But the bubble is coming on this. Many kids can't afford it, and that's why so many young kids are enamored of people like Bernie Sanders, because his answer is college should be free. One more entitlement, right?
To everyone.
Right, and if you're right, even kids who don't want to go.
You know, I wish it's sad, and what you're saying is so true. Couple points. I enrolled my daughter, I tried to enroll my son into pre-K over on the in Grapevine, Euless, GEC, Grapevine, Eulessville, Hoyville School District. They told me I couldn't enroll my son in pre-K. I said his English was too good. And we're bilingual in my home. My wife is Japanese. And they said, oh, his English is too good. He can't start.
It is true. Non-Americans speak better English. They really do.
And I was like, what? They said his English is too good. Okay. That got me and my wife.
And I didn't mean to imply that you and your wife were not English speakers. They are Americans. But foreign people who learn the language tend to learn it better than many modern American kids are taught.
We flip back and forth between Japanese, English, and Korean and some other languages in the house. But they just said it was too good. And I was like, what do you mean?
But that's the premise of Common Core, right? We don't want kids to excel. Kids who excel, by definition, oppress kids who can't. So your kids come in speaking English flawlessly and speaking other languages, your kids traumatize those kids. Education is not about making your kid better than he is. It's about making the other kids feel good about not knowing as much. That's where education is. I will say this, and you probably know this, there's not a single shred of evidence that pre-K programs help kids develop faster. And there's a lot of evidence that they pull them back because they get around those other kids and they get bad habits, right? So I would consider yourself lucky, all right, in that regard, because they're getting a very good, highly lingual education. Now, why would you stick them in those schools? Where all they're going to do is come home with disease and snot and have their teachers pulling them back all
That's
the
an
time.
idea my wife came up with, and that's okay, we'll do it. But you know, I've got.
How do you say, honey, listen in Japanese?
Keep telling us this.
Then you go home and say that.
And for those who don't know, my name is Willie Belch. I'm running for Congress here in the Metroplex area. But I sometimes take my daughter with me on my campaign trail. She goes to UT Arlington. One of the first things she did, she came home talking some of those liberal thoughts and ideas. We had a really, really good conversation. I didn't get mad. I didn't hoop and holler. I didn't jump. I didn't lose. I didn't blow a gasket. But what I said to her, I said, you know, that sounds good. It was like free college, and she was talking about that. I said, you know, that sounds really good. Yeah, it does. I said, remember your friend Gemma? Yeah, the basketball player. She said, how's her grades? She's not doing too good, Dad. But she plays ball, right? Yeah. I said, you're a straight A student, aren't you? Yeah. How about you give her 1 or 2 of your A's? Or better yet, how about you accept a B and give her your points? So that her C's come up to B and you guys make B's across the board. And she was like, yeah. And she thought about it and she looked around for a second. She says, why do I got to give her my stuff? I said, because she needs to go play ball and you're going to work hard. She says, but I work hard, so why do I have to give her my grades, my points? I said, so that she can have what you have and everything's equal and fair. I said, isn't that what you want?
And you should be allowed to play half her basketball games in the name. She gets a scholarship, right? I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you're not. You're an A student. You get a scholarship. She's an A student, right? Why don't you get to play half her basketball games? I did this once in class. And I vowed not to do it again because they were so angry with me. But I walked in with a test. They had a test. And I gave them their grades, right? And the grades were everything from 50% failing all the way up to high 90s. And I gave them their grade. And then I crossed out the grade, and I told them which student if they had failed, I borrowed points from that student. And I told the students who had A's, I took 30 points away from them to give, here's a girl, you got 100%, this girl got 50%. So I'm taking 25 points from you, so you all have 75. You should have seen, and I'll say this, even the kids who got the points felt bad about it, because they saw it. Kids don't see the impact. If it's free, someone's paying for it, just not us, Daddy, right? When in the classroom and dynamic, they could see what the ones who got the 75% extra 25 points felt as bad as the ones who lost it because they could see they admitted, but she worked hard. Give the points back, one girl said. She worked hard. They started confessing to me like I'm a priest. I was out, with my boyfriend. We got drunk, and I woke up somewhere I didn't even know where I was. I don't deserve those. And so all of a sudden it was coming out that way. But see, this is the thing. They learn these things as huge, broad, abstract, and no one's ever hurt by them. I think Margaret Thatcher was exactly right. Socialism works until you run out of somebody else's money, right? And then suddenly, once all the 1%ers are gone, then you get rid of the 10%ers. Pretty soon, you in the bottom 20, you got to get your share taken from you too, right? And that's always the way that it works.
I just congratulated my daughter and told her welcome to the world of conservatives.
Yes, and how about you're running for office? Say real quick where you're running.
District 33.
District 33. What district is that? Is that
East Fort Worth, parts of Arlington, parts of Grand Prairie, and all of West Dallas and southern parts of Farmers Branch.
Well, good luck to you, and thank you for coming today. Willie? Billups, okay. Remember that name if you're in District 33.
We need to help him get elected.
There you go.
Are you just south of Kenny Marchand?
Yes.
I graduated from college in 1967, and you talked about having the people of different ethnic groups to be pushed into their own dormitories. Back then, we called that segregation.
Of course you did. And probably back then, when it happened back then, everybody knew what was bad. How did we go from that to this now? That it's okay to segregate on the basis of race. It's okay to segregate on the basis of... And I said that too. You look at the new dorms that are in Madison, they're building a brand new dorm complex just for transgender kids. And it's 10 times better than what the other kids are living in, right? So, and in the transgender dorm, if you feel that you're threatened by all other genders, they'll give you your own apartment. So if you argue that as a transgender person, I'm freaked out by both women and men, then you get to live alone. I'd be all over that. Yeah, because they can't ask you, can they? The minute they ask you, they violate their own rules. How dare you question my authoritative sense of myself? Yeah.
You're these were college kids?
College kids. Yes, sir. Yeah.
There's only two things Elizabeth Warren has done in the last year and a half that I've agreed with. One is she's promoted or been in favor of reforming the government program that pays disabled people as low as 35 cents an hour for the same work a regular person gets paid. The other is a risk-sharing plan for universities where they have some skin in the game. They have an incentive to turn out people with degrees that have more value, so there's lower default rates. What do you think? How do you think that would affect?
I don't trust Liawatha as far as I can tell.
But in general, college has skin in the game.
I mean, there's two arguments to that. As a product of a failed...
I call it
Pocahontas, that better than Liawatha? How about Dances with Lies? In any event, here's my worry. She's a product of a corrupt and broken university system. She exploited minority scholarships to get a job at Harvard to begin with. Her entire fiscal plan is Marxist. The idea that she is then going to turn around when she gets to be president or have that kind of power and compel universities who are turning out little voters for her to invest more, she can say it all she wants.
This was a Senate plan that she supported. It's for colleges that if they have a higher default rates than the average,
on a
they
student
pay
loan.
A penalty.
Default on student loans?
Yeah.
Oh,
if their graduates have a higher default rates,
right.
or if they don't get, if they have a low percentage of jobs, they want to give colleges skin in the game so that they have an incentive to turn out people with more marketable skills, and so their default rates are lower.
Sure, I misunderstood that. Here's the problem with that, though. The minute that you do that, the minute that you force the colleges to produce certain numbers of graduates, then what happens? You start getting the social promotions. What's happening at the elementary school level, middle school level, right? The public schools now, they get money from the state and the feds based on how their graduation rates are. Are kids going from second to third to fourth grade? So guess what's happening now? If you're a second grader who can't read at a second grade level, they push you through artificially. Or even better than this, even better than that, when you have kids who are failing, now you just label them ill. If you label failing kids as sick kids, developmentally challenged kids, then you get 3 times the money in remediation dollars. So nobody fails. You either are socially promoted if you can't do anything, or you're labeled as ill because it's all about money. That entire Senate plan is based on that. The skin in the game would not stop universities from doing exactly what they're doing now. giving away increasingly worthless degrees. Now, how you would measure that after college? How do you hold a university accountable because after 2 years this guy didn't get a job?
Default breaks those student
Right.
loans.
I mean, here's the other little thing I should throw out there, and whether you know it or not, we have now reached the point where the average American, the average student loan debt in this country collectively, student loan debt is $1.2 trillion.
More than credit card debt.
It is more than the collected credit card debt of the whole country. That's not getting paid back. I mean, and people are defaulting for all sorts of reasons. So I don't know. I mean,
I say nothing. You get a lot of thought on how it goes.
look, it's a constructive plan to try to hold universities accountable.
Yeah,
but you've got to do more. I think that once they're out of your system, you have a very tenuous hold over the universities. You got to get them where they live. Yeah.
In your experience on these college campuses, how much election fraud did you see? Like with having the kids who already graduated have somebody else vote for them, for registering non-residents,
I mean, I spend as little time on campus as I have to. So I teach my classes and leave for a variety of reasons. So I didn't watch much of it. I know for a fact that the bigger problem on college campuses is the liberals can't get the kids to vote. If 90% of college kids voted, I can't imagine another Republican ever getting elected ever. But only about 28% of college kids bother. That's good for us. So the problem is, I don't know that there's much fraud on the campuses themselves. I think that one of the frustrating things for progressives is they can't get the kids to the ballot boxes because the ideology has already been put in them. So I haven't watched enough of that to know. Yep.
What kind of demographic are you seeing? I mean, they have an engineering university there. I mean, they have an engineering curriculum, correct, in Wyoming?
In Wisconsin.
And what demographic do you see the majority of? Because I've been working in that industry 35 years, and it seems the majority of people, say age 40, 42, and younger, are either Central Asia, Middle Eastern,
in engineering?
In engineering.
Well, there's two things. One is, as with so many other aspects of American life, medicine, for instance, when we move towards a more socialized, nationalized form of medicine under Obamacare, enrollments in medical schools plummeted, right? We're already facing, within 6 years, a huge doctor shortage. So what are they doing now? They're bringing medical school students in from foreign countries. There's that. But be careful about the sciences, because the sciences now are beginning to suffer the same thing. I already mentioned to you green chemistry and feminist biology. I graduated from Purdue University, which is one of the premier engineering colleges in the country. Very, very strong program. And Purdue last year hired a brand new dean of the engineering department, a woman, and her entire platform is to make engineers less white and male. And her argument is, if we have to lower the rigor required of engineers to get more women involved, then we must do it. And so Purdue, a world-class engineering school, is now being run by a woman who says engineering doesn't matter, diversity matters. And so you're beginning to see that across the country. This lady first, and then we'll go there.
Students who want to go into the medical field, either in nursing or doctors or even veterinarians, are they getting a better education and less indoctrination?
To the degree that it's science-based, yes. To the degree that much of their coursework is dealt with biology and chemistry, that's not entry level. I mean, the entry level gen ed courses is where it gets corrupted. Will they encounter some of that? Yeah, but not as much. The same thing can be said of accounting or business or chemistry or math, you would think. But here's the problem with that, as I was just trying to suggest, as in Purdue's situation. All of these things now are being corrupted. The sociological, socialist worldview is already undermined. Well, science. A bunch of academics in the last few months have been writing articles about how logic, truth, and the scientific method, objectivity, all four of those things are racist. Logic, the empirical method, the scientific method, objective truth, these things are now called sexist, racist, patriarchal holdovers of white male culture going all the way back to the Greeks. And they're calling for science programs to delegitimize truth and right answers. And I mentioned cultural math to you, right? That one main feature of the modern math movement is to de-emphasize correctness and right answers in math. Make everybody feel comfortable moving numbers around without holding them accountable to the right answers. And to not do that is considered racism or sexism or bigotry. It's catching on more and more.
But how does that affect someone who wants to be a doctor or a nurse?
Well, what I'm suggesting to you is that they're still going to get serious courses in nursing or doctoring or science or biology. However, more and more, they're going to be pushed to challenge authorities, right? To challenge the ideas of medicine, to challenge the premises of sciences. Or, if not enough of their teachers are females, to fight that battle, right? And inevitably what happens is, there's only, people don't know this either, and we really should talk about it briefly. And please, you won't, this is long-winded, don't have to stay, don't spare my feelings, go if you gotta go. But right now, every aspect of undergraduate is dominated by girls. Girls get 80% of the undergraduate scholarships right now. Right now, there are 6.5 girls for every 3.5 boys on a college campus. Girls have radically outpaced boys. A lot of this has nothing to do with boys' achievement, it's just what the colleges are doing. If you had those numbers, if boys were doing that against girls, it would be a national nightmare, but nobody cares. There's only one area of graduate study, this includes law, there's only one area of graduate study that's not predominantly female now, and that's the hard sciences. And what's the only thing you hear from our college campuses? The hard sciences are sexist because there aren't more women, right? And so what's the entire premise of the engineer at Purdue? There aren't enough women engineers. Women dominate every other aspect, and freely, by the way. Women freely choose to become sociologists or historians, right? Women freely choose to go into all those other fields, psychology, right? Law. But because they don't choose enough for the liberals to go into the hard sciences, because, as you point out, at that level, science gets hard, right? They don't choose it enough, that must be sexism. That's all you hear now. It's really terrible. And so what's going on at Purdue is kind of the same thing they're going to be getting in their medical schools. Yeah.
Well, I was just about to say, I'm at the expense of making all of the women here angry at me, but I've seen a few of these women. They must have slipped through the cracks.
Look, I believe categorically, because I believe there's such a thing as male and female. I believe that. That's a terribly, terribly sexist thing to say. I believe in man and woman. They're unique, biological, discrete entities. I believe that, and so therefore I believe that there are categorical differences between them. And because every now and then you have a brilliant female scientist, doesn't necessarily mean that women should be on the same par always with men in science. It doesn't mean that at all. And there are other things that we know women have a superior approach to too when they study them. It's common knowledge. Here's the thing. Let this sink in for a moment. How did we get to a place in American universities where we're telling kids, even in middle school and high school now, we're telling kids that the idea of male and female is a social construct. There are no such thing as men and women, we're telling kids. Meanwhile, 76 different made-up genders between male and female, you have to take as deadly serious. The made-up genders, 76 of them, you better believe in them or you're a bigot, and we'll punish you. But the only thing you can't believe in is man and woman. And you saw that kid in the Indiana University of Pennsylvania 2 weeks ago. A student at Indiana U in Pennsylvania. He is a biology major. And in a class, it was a science class, it was a biology class. He was being lectured by the professor that there is no such thing as man or woman. That gender is a construct, it's not scientific. You are whatever gender you say you are. She laid out 76 different gender variants. He raised his hand and said, this is a biology class, and all my other science class tell me that there is man and woman. She threw him out of the class and pushed to have him expelled from the university. The university came this close to expelling him until the national press, the media, and they backed off. But simply a science student, simply pointing out that according to science, male and female exist, he almost got expelled for that. That's where we're at now.
I was looking at your K through 12, and I was just wondering about have you got different things for helping children find their strengths after 50 years, 100 years of public education? You know, part of the difficulty you have for parents to train up children in the way they should go is they got herded through a mass turnstile. To a degree, there's a degree of common core in parents who don't know what they don't know. They can still send them to you. However, they still don't know what they don't know about how to bend them, shape them. Are they, do they have hydrophoria? Are they high analytical? Are they, there's so many different aspects. So one of the things that, just from one educator to another, you might consider helping the parents have resources to help them as their children are growing up determine how are they bent?
Well,
Do they
at our
have
school,
musical aptitude?
at our school we do. We make the parents, when we bring kids into our school, we insist first and foremost to the parents that you're educating your kids and we're helping you. We are not, because if we did that, if we just took their kids like the public school did and then forced our worldview upon them, we'd get them at the public schools. So every 3 weeks, parents are called or emailed about what their kids are doing. And we have routine conferences with the moms and dads, because here's the thing. Not only do I believe in male and female, but I believe in God. And I understand that God did not make us all as collectives, right? Even the snowflakes are different, even everybody's fingerprints are different, our DNA is different. Fact is that God made us individuals. You want to boil this down to its broadest sense that covers everything? We are in a war right now between the individual and the collective. Whether it's government, whether it's education, the progressives, the Marxists, the nihilists, the radicals, they are all collectivists. I love what Ayn Rand once said. When will people wake up and realize that the smallest minority on earth is always the individual? Albert Einstein said, I mentioned this at lunch too, Albert Einstein said as Nazi Germany was beginning to standardize kids, force kids to become the same way, cut off the high achievers, prop up the low achievers, keep them just dumb enough to need the government for everything, so they became good little wards of the state. Einstein said of that whole regime, he said, we standardize automobiles and toasters. We do not and should never standardize a child, right? One size fits all, outcome-based education. And I think that if you look at it this way, and this is the point I get to make in my classes all the time, the single greatest advocate for the individual in human history is Jesus Christ. No one, no thinker, no philosopher, no one my kids aren't ready for Christ as God. My kids aren't ready for the Christian mysteries. They're still trying to figure out that boobos and boobs aren't the same thing, right? Nevertheless, they can understand the argument when you explain it to them, that the entire presence mystery, the entire ministry of Christ was not dedicated to crowds. He met people where they were, face to face, one to one. I tell my kids all the time, because I teach the Bible, it's one of the things I do teach. I said, if I were Jesus, I would have been a coward, right? All those sweaty, nasty, leprous bodies bumping up against me, I'd have pulled an I Dream a Genie on them, right? I'd have put all the sick people in Galilee in a big room or a big field and I'd have point them into health. I would have been putting my fingers in their ears and I wouldn't have been making mud with my spit and wiping it on their eyes, but he did it! Because the only relationship is between the Creator and his individual. Your kids are individuals. And so here's what maybe this is the best place to stop for the day. Here's my fundamental vision in all of this. What we have to do is recognize that all kids aren't the same kid, and if we recognize that, then we realize that our job is not to force them into cookie cutters or to make them become a jack of all trades and compromise what they're really good at so that they have a rounded education. Figure out, and this is another reason not to put your kid in those schools. You know them. You know what they can and can't do. You know what they will and won't do. You know what they're capable of and what is not good for them. Make them be what God called them to be. All this other stuff just gets in the way. And there's no public school teacher, however well-meaning, who can do that better than you, right? So do it. To treat your kids like the individual special creatures God gave you and nurture not just their individuality, but make them lovers of individualism too. Then they'll be able to fight off the collective. All right. Thank you very much.